The silver chalice trembled in Lydia Ashworth's hands as she set it down on the obsidian table, the last drops of crimson liquid catching the candlelight like liquid rubies. 50 years. 50 years of tasting blood meant for another, of standing between death and the most powerful vampire in existence, of living in a gilded cage that had become both her sanctuary and her prison. "The vintage is clean, Your Majesty," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil raging in her chest. "No trace of silver, wolfsbane, or any other toxins." King Aldrich Drackle nodded from his throne, those ancient amber eyes studying her with an intensity that had never diminished over the decades. At first glance, he appeared to be a man in his early 30s, tall, aristocratic, with sharp cheekbones and midnight black hair that fell in waves to his shoulders. But Lydia knew better. She'd seen the weight of centuries in those eyes, had witnessed the careful control he maintained over power that could level mountains. "Thank you, Lydia," he said, his voice carrying the faint accent of old Romania. "As always, your service is invaluable." There was something in his tone tonight, a hesitation that made her look up sharply. In 50 years, she'd learned to read every nuance of his expression, every subtle shift in his demeanor. It was a survival skill when your life depended on detecting poison in blood, but it had become something more, an intimate knowledge of a man who revealed himself to no one. "Your Majesty," she began, then stopped. The words she'd been rehearsing for months stuck in her throat like shards of glass. "Yes?" Lydia straightened her shoulders, drawing on reserves of courage she'd built over 5 decades of facing death daily. "I need to speak with you. Privately." Aldrich's expression didn't change, but she caught the slight tightening around his eyes. With a gesture, he dismissed the guards and courtiers who always lingered at the edges of the throne room. Within moments, they were alone in the vast chamber, surrounded by tapestries that depicted 1,000 years of vampire history. "Speak," he commanded, though his voice was gentler than it had been moments before. "I'm resigning my position, Your Majesty." The words fell into the silence like stones into still water, creating ripples that seemed to spread through the very air between them. Aldrich went perfectly still, his supernatural control the only thing preventing a reaction that might have shattered every piece of glass in the room. "I beg your pardon. I said I'm resigning. I can no longer serve as your blood taster." Lydia's hands were steady now, her decision made. "I've given you 50 years of my life, Your Majesty. I believe that's enough." Aldrich rose from his throne with fluid grace, moving down the steps until he stood before her. This close, she could smell his scent, sandalwood and winter air, and something indefinably masculine that had haunted her dreams for decades. 50 years, he repeated slowly. "Yes, I suppose it has been that long." His gaze moved over her face, taking in features that remained as youthful as they had been the day she'd first entered his service. "You haven't aged a day. The medicinal doses of your blood saw to that." It was true. The small amounts of vampire blood required to build immunity to various toxins had kept her frozen at 25, though her mind and soul felt ancient. But immortality means nothing without freedom. Freedom. The word seemed to taste bitter on his tongue. "And what, pray tell? Do you know of freedom, Lydia? You've lived in my castle for half a century. You've been protected, provided for, kept safe from the dangers of the world. Kept prisoner," she interrupted, surprising them both with her boldness. "Gilded cage or not, Your Majesty, it's still a cage." Aldrich's jaw tightened. "You speak of imprisonment as if I've been cruel to you. Have I not given you everything you could desire? Fine clothes, beautiful chambers, access to the greatest library in Europe. Have I not treated you with respect and consideration?" "You have," Lydia admitted. "But you've never given me choice." "Choice?" His laugh was harsh. "You chose to enter my service. You chose to accept the position when it was offered. I was 17 years old, orphaned and starving in the streets of London. You offered me food and shelter in exchange for risking my life daily. That wasn't a choice, Your Majesty. That was survival." The accusation hung between them like a blade. Aldrich turned away, his hands clasped behind his back as he stared up at the massive portrait of his father that dominated the far wall. "You could have left at any time," he said quietly. "Could I? When was the last time I was permitted beyond these walls without an armed escort? When was the last time I spoke to another human being who wasn't in your service? When was the last time I made a decision about my own life that didn't require your approval?" Each question was a blow, and Lydia could see them landing even though Aldrich's back was turned to her. His shoulders tensed with each word, his supernatural stillness becoming more pronounced. "The world beyond these walls is dangerous," he said finally, "especially for someone with your unique knowledge. You mean someone who knows your weaknesses, someone who could betray your secrets to your enemies." "That's not what I meant, isn't it?" Lydia moved closer, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "In 50 years, Your Majesty, have I ever given you reason to doubt my loyalty? Have I ever betrayed a confidence or failed in my duties?" "No," he admitted, still not turning around. "Never. Then why can't you trust me with my own freedom?" The question struck home, and this time Aldrich did turn, his amber eyes blazing with emotions she couldn't quite read. "Because—" He stopped, the words dying on his lips. "Because what?" For a moment she thought he might actually answer. His lips parted, his expression vulnerable in a way she'd never seen before. But then the mask slammed back into place, the king reasserting himself over the man. "Because you are valuable to me," he said coldly. "Your skills, your knowledge, your service. I am not inclined to lose such an asset." The word asset hit her like a physical blow. After 50 years, after everything they'd shared, the quiet conversations during long nights, the moments of unexpected laughter, the way he'd held her when she'd nearly died from a particularly virulent poison, she was still just an asset to him. "I see," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "Then I suppose we have nothing more to discuss." She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. "Wait." Lydia paused but didn't turn around. "Your Majesty, name your price." "I beg your pardon?" "Your price for staying. Whatever you want, gold, jewels, your own estate, a title, name it, and it's yours." Slowly, Lydia turned back to face him. "You think this is about money? Everything is about something. Name your price." The casual dismissal of her feelings, the reduction of 50 years of service to a simple transaction, ignited something fierce and bright in her chest. "You want to know my price, Your Majesty? My price is freedom. Complete, total, unconditional freedom." "Impossible. Then we have nothing more to discuss." She started toward the door again. "Lydia, wait." This time his voice carried a note of something that might have been desperation. "You don't understand. If you leave, if you're out there alone, my enemies will find you. They'll use you against me. Then that's a risk you'll have to take. It's not a risk I'm willing to take." She spun around, anger finally breaking through her careful control. "It's not your choice to make. This is my life, Your Majesty, mine. And I'm tired of living it according to your fears." "My fears?" His own anger was rising now, filling the room with an energy that made the candle flames dance. "You think this is about fear? What else could it be? You're the most powerful vampire in existence. You have armies at your command, allies across the globe, wealth beyond measure. The only thing you fear is losing control. You're wrong. Am I? Then prove it. Give me what I'm asking for." They stared at each other across the vast throne room. Two people who'd shared 50 years of their lives, but had never truly understood each other. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words and buried emotions. Finally, Aldrich spoke. "Very well." Lydia blinked, certain she'd misheard. "What?" "I said very well. You want your freedom? You shall have it." He moved back to his throne, settling into it with the fluid grace that marked all his movements. "But I have one condition." "Of course you do. 30 days. What about 30 days? You will spend 30 days in the outside world. Completely free, no guards, no restrictions, no interference from me. You may go wherever you wish, do whatever you please. At the end of 30 days, if you still wish to leave permanently, I will not stop you." Lydia studied his face, looking for the trap she was certain existed. "And if I decide to stay, then you return to your position, with whatever accommodations we can negotiate to make your service more palatable." It was more than she dared hope for, which made her immediately suspicious. "Why 30 days?" "Because," Aldrich said, his voice carefully neutral, "I believe that once you experience the reality of the world beyond these walls, you'll realize that what you have here is worth preserving. You think I'll come running back. I think you'll make an informed decision based on experience rather than fantasy." The condescension in his tone made her teeth clench. "And you're so certain that the outside world will disappoint me? I'm certain that 50 years of protection have left you unprepared for certain realities, such as poverty, loneliness, the casual cruelty of humans toward those they perceive as different, the constant struggle for survival that marks most mortal lives. His amber eyes met hers steadily. You've lived in luxury for half a century, Lydia. You have no idea what you're asking for. Then I suppose I'm about to find out. Indeed. He leaned back in his throne, his expression unreadable. Do we have an agreement? Lydia hesitated. 30 days wasn't the immediate freedom she'd demanded, but it was more than she'd expected to get. And if she could prove to herself, and to him, that she could survive and thrive in the outside world, perhaps he'd finally understand that she wasn't the helpless girl he'd rescued 50 years ago. We have an agreement, she said. When do I leave? Tomorrow at sunset. You'll be provided with appropriate clothing, identification documents, and enough money to last the 30 days. After that, he shrugged, you'll be entirely on your own. Good. She turned toward the door, then paused. Your Majesty? Yes? Who will taste your blood while I'm gone? For just a moment his mask slipped, and she saw something raw and vulnerable in his expression. I suppose I'll have to take my chances. The words hit her harder than they should have. In 50 years, she'd never missed a single night of service. The idea of him facing potential poison without her protection sent an unexpected stab of fear through her chest. You could train someone else. In 30 days? Impossible. It took you months to develop the necessary immunities, and that was with daily doses of my blood. No, Lydia. If you leave me vulnerable. Then perhaps you should reconsider. No. His voice was firm. A bargain is a bargain. You'll have your 30 days. Lydia nodded, not trusting herself to speak. As she reached the door, his voice stopped her one final time. Lydia? Yes, Your Majesty? Be careful out there. The world has changed since you last walked in it. There was something in his voice, concern, perhaps even affection, that made her heart skip. But when she turned back, his expression was once again perfectly controlled. I will, she said softly. Goodbye, Your Majesty. Goodbye, Lydia. As the massive doors closed behind her, Lydia felt the weight of 50 years lifting from her shoulders. Tomorrow she would be free. For the first time since she was 17 years old, she would wake up in a world where her choices were her own. So why did it feel like she was making the biggest mistake of her life? The next evening, Lydia stood in the castle's main courtyard, a single suitcase at her feet, and a leather portfolio containing her new identity documents in her hand. The setting sun painted the ancient stones in shades of gold and crimson, and for a moment she felt a pang of something that might have been regret. This had been her home for 50 years. These walls had protected her, sheltered her, kept her safe from a world that had shown her nothing but cruelty in her youth. But they had also confined her, limited her, reduced her to a single function in service to a man who saw her as nothing more than a useful tool. Miss Ashworth? She turned to find Marcus, the castle's head of security, approaching with a set of car keys. He was one of the few vampires in Aldrich's service who had ever treated her with genuine kindness, and she felt a stab of sadness at leaving him behind. Your transportation, he said, gesturing toward a sleek black sedan parked near the gates. The car is yours for the duration of your sabbatical. GPS, credit cards, and emergency contacts are all in the glove compartment. Thank you, Marcus. She took the keys, surprised by how heavy they felt in her palm. Will you look after him while I'm gone? Marcus's expression softened. You know I will, though I suspect he'll be looking after himself just fine. He's going without a blood taster for 30 days, that's not fine. No, Marcus agreed quietly. It's not, but it's his choice to make. Is it? Or is it just another way to control me? Make me feel guilty for leaving, worry about his safety, come running back? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his ancient eyes studying her face. Do you really believe that's what this is about? I don't know what to believe anymore. Then perhaps 30 days away will give you some clarity. He stepped back, his expression formal once again. Safe travels, Miss Ashworth. Lydia nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She picked up her suitcase and walked toward the car, each step feeling like a small act of rebellion. As she reached the vehicle, she turned back for one last look at the castle that had been her world for half a century. High above, in the tower window that belonged to the royal chambers, she could see a figure silhouetted against the light. Aldrich, watching her leave. Even from this distance, she could feel the weight of his gaze, the intensity of emotions he would never allow himself to express. For a moment, she hesitated. It would be so easy to turn around, to go back, to accept the safety and security he offered. But 50 years of safety had come at the cost of her soul, and she refused to spend another 50 years as a beautiful prisoner. Lydia got into the car, started the engine, and drove through the gates without looking back. The first week of freedom was intoxicating. Lydia had chosen London as her destination, drawn by memories of the city where she'd been born and raised. But the London of her youth was gone, replaced by a gleaming metropolis of glass and steel that bore little resemblance to the grimy industrial city she remembered. She rented a small flat in Bloomsbury, delighting in the simple act of choosing her own furniture, her own decorations, her own schedule. For the first time in 50 years, she could wake up when she pleased, eat what she wanted, go where she chose without asking permission or explaining herself to anyone. The modern world was a revelation. The internet, smartphones, social media, technologies that had developed while she was locked away in Aldrich's castle. She spent hours exploring this new digital landscape, marveling at how connected the world had become. But it was the small freedoms that meant the most. Buying coffee from a street vendor, riding the underground during rush hour, sitting in Hyde Park and watching people live their lives without fear or supernatural politics. These simple human experiences, denied to her for decades, felt like the greatest luxuries imaginable. She also began to understand what Aldrich had meant about the world changing. The casual cruelty he'd mentioned was everywhere, in the way people ignored the homeless, in the sharp words exchanged between strangers, in the constant undercurrent of fear and suspicion that seemed to permeate modern life. But there was beauty too, kindness and compassion and moments of genuine human connection that reminded her why she'd wanted to be part of this world again. It was during her second week that she first noticed she was being watched. The realization came gradually, a growing sense of unease that she initially attributed to paranoia. After 50 years of living in a controlled environment, it was natural to feel exposed and vulnerable in the outside world. But as the days passed, the feeling intensified. A man in a gray coat who seemed to be wherever she went, a woman with distinctive red hair who appeared in 3 different coffee shops she visited, cars that followed her route a little too consistently to be coincidence. By the end of the second week, Lydia was certain someone was tracking her movements. The question was who and why. Her first instinct was to blame Aldrich. Despite his promise of complete freedom, it would be like him to have her followed for her own protection. But the more she observed her watchers, the more convinced she became that these weren't Aldrich's people. His operatives were subtle, professional, nearly invisible. These watchers were skilled but not quite skilled enough, and there was something predatory about their attention that set her nerves on edge. It was on a rainy Thursday evening, as she walked home from the British Museum, that they finally made their move. The attack came in an alley between her flat and the main street, 3 figures emerging from the shadows with supernatural speed. Vampires, she realized immediately, recognizing the fluid grace of their movements and the predatory gleam in their eyes. "Lydia Ashworth," the leader said, his voice carrying a faint Eastern European accent. "You're a difficult woman to find." "I'm sorry," Lydia replied, backing toward the alley's entrance. "Do we know each other?" "Not personally, no. But your reputation precedes you." He smiled, revealing fangs that gleamed in the dim streetlight. 50 years as the Vampire King's blood taster. You must know all his secrets, all his weaknesses. Understanding dawned like a cold sunrise. You're Kozlov's people. Victor Kozlov, Aldrich's oldest enemy. A vampire lord who'd been trying to overthrow Aldrich's rule for centuries. Always failing. Always retreating to plot another attempt. Lydia had heard his name whispered in the castle's corridors, had seen the reports of his various schemes and betrayals. "Very good," the vampire said. "Lord Kozlov is most eager to make your acquaintance. I'm afraid I'll have to decline." That wasn't a request. The vampires moved with inhuman speed, but Lydia had spent 50 years in the company of supernatural predators. She knew their patterns, their capabilities, their limitations. As the first attacker lunged forward, she ducked low and rolled to the side, coming up with a silver letter opener she'd taken to carrying since noticing her watchers. The blade caught the vampire across the throat and he stumbled back with a hiss of pain and surprise. Silver wouldn't kill him, but it would slow him down. "Impressive," the leader said, circling her like a wolf stalking prey. "But you're still only human." Human, yes. Helpless, no. She'd learned more than just poison detection during her years in Aldrich's service. Marcus had insisted on teaching her basic self-defense, and she'd picked up other skills from the various supernatural beings who frequented the castle. Not enough to win a fight against 3 vampires, but perhaps enough to escape. The second attacker came from her left and she spun to meet him, the silver blade leaving a burning line across his cheek. But the third vampire was already moving, and she felt claws rake across her back as she tried to dodge. Pain flared through her body and she stumbled forward, her vision blurring. Vampire claws carried a mild paralytic toxin, not enough to kill a human, but enough to incapacitate them. She had perhaps minutes before she lost consciousness. "Enough playing," the leader said. "Lord Kozlov is waiting." As darkness crept in at the edges of her vision, Lydia's last coherent thought was a bitter recognition of irony. She'd spent 50 years safe in Aldrich's castle, and within 2 weeks of leaving, she'd been captured by his enemies. Perhaps he'd been right about the dangers of the outside world after all. When consciousness returned, Lydia found herself in what appeared to be an abandoned warehouse, her wrists bound with silver-lined restraints that burned against her skin. The space was vast and empty, lit by harsh fluorescent lights that cast everything in stark, unforgiving detail. "Ah, you're awake," a cultured voice said from the shadows. "Excellent. I was beginning to worry that my associates had been too enthusiastic in their retrieval methods." A figure stepped into the light, and Lydia found herself face to face with Viktor Kozlov himself. He was tall and lean, with silver hair and pale blue eyes that held the cold intelligence of a predator. Unlike Aldrich's aristocratic bearing, there was something reptilian about Kozlov, something that suggested cruelty was not just a tool, but a pleasure. "Lord Kozlov, I presume," Lydia said, pleased that her voice remained steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. "Indeed, and you are the famous Lydia Ashworth, Aldrich's pet human." He moved closer, circling her chair like a shark scenting blood. 50 years of tasting his blood, of sharing his secrets, of warming his bed. "I never warmed his bed," Lydia interrupted sharply. Kozlov paused, his eyebrows rising in surprise. "No? How disappointing. I had assumed that after 5 decades, even the cold vampire king might have developed some affection for his little pet. I was his blood taster, nothing more." "Nothing more?" Kozlov's smile was sharp and predatory. "My dear, you underestimate your own value. Do you know how many times I've tried to get close to Aldrich? How many assassins I've sent, how many poisons I've attempted to slip into his food and drink? And every time, every single time, you were there to stand between him and death. It was my job. It was your devotion. 50 years of unwavering loyalty, of risking your life daily for a man who saw you as nothing more than a useful tool." Kozlov's voice carried a note of genuine curiosity. "Tell me, what finally broke that devotion? What made you leave your gilded cage?" Lydia remained silent, unwilling to give him any information that might be used against Aldrich. "No matter," Kozlov continued. "The important thing is that you're here now, and you're going to help me finally destroy your former master. I'll never betray him. Oh, my dear, you won't have a choice." Kozlov gestured, and one of his subordinates stepped forward carrying a silver case. "You see, I've spent decades studying Aldrich's habits, his routines, his weaknesses, and I've discovered something fascinating about vampire blood." He opened the case, revealing a collection of vials filled with dark liquid. Vampire blood, when properly treated with certain alchemical processes, can carry more than just healing properties. It can carry suggestions, compulsions, commands that override the subject's conscious will. Lydia's blood ran cold. Mind control. Crude, but accurate. The process requires a very specific type of vampire blood. Ancient, powerful, and most importantly, willingly given. Aldrich's blood, in other words. Blood that you've been consuming in small doses for 50 years. "The medicinal doses," Lydia whispered, understanding flooding through her. "Exactly. Your body is saturated with his blood, your system perfectly attuned to its properties. With the right catalyst, I can turn you into the perfect weapon against him." Kozlov selected one of the vials, holding it up to the light. One dose of this and you'll return to his castle with an overwhelming compulsion to complete a very specific task. What task? You're going to poison him, of course. Not enough to kill. That would be too quick, too merciful. Just enough to weaken him, to make him vulnerable to more conventional attacks. Kozlov's smile was genuinely pleased. And the beautiful irony is that he'll never suspect you. His loyal blood taster returned from her sabbatical, eager to resume her duties. He'll know something's wrong. He'll sense the compulsion. Will he? You've been gone for 2 weeks, my dear. You're probably experiencing withdrawal symptoms from the lack of vampire blood in your system. Mood swings, emotional instability, perhaps even hallucinations. If you seem a bit off when you return, he'll attribute it to that. The plan was diabolical in its simplicity, and Lydia could see exactly how it would work. Aldrich would be so relieved to have her back, so focused on the threat of poison in his blood, that he might not notice the more subtle signs of mental manipulation. "You're assuming I'll go back to him," she said. "Oh, you will. The compulsion will see to that. You'll feel an overwhelming need to return to his side, to resume your duties, to protect him from harm. It will feel like love, like devotion, like the most natural thing in the world. And if I refuse to drink your poison?" Kozlov's expression hardened. "Then I'll simply kill you and find another way to destroy him. Your cooperation would be preferable, but it's not strictly necessary." Lydia closed her eyes, her mind racing through possibilities. She was trapped, bound with silver, surrounded by vampires who would kill her without hesitation. But she'd spent 50 years learning to think under pressure, to find solutions in impossible situations. "I need time to consider," she said finally. "Time?" Kozlov laughed. "My dear, you have until sunrise. Then, willing or not, you'll drink my little concoction and return to your king. Sunrise is hours away. Indeed. I suggest you use them wisely." Kozlov withdrew into the shadows, leaving Lydia alone with her guards and her thoughts. The warehouse fell silent except for the distant sounds of London traffic and the soft footsteps of vampires moving through the darkness. Hours to live, hours to find a way out of an impossible situation, hours to decide whether to save herself or save the man who had controlled her life for 50 years. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd left Aldrich's castle seeking freedom, only to find herself in chains. She'd demanded the right to make her own choices, only to face a choice between betrayal and death. But perhaps, she thought as she tested the strength of her bonds, there was a third option. The silver restraints burned against her wrists, but they weren't designed to hold a human who'd spent 50 years building up immunity to various toxins and metals. The medicinal doses of vampire blood that had kept her young had also made her more resilient than a normal human, more resistant to pain and injury. Slowly, carefully, she began to work at the restraints. The process was agonizing. Silver burned vampire flesh, and while she wasn't a vampire, the blood in her system reacted to the metal with searing pain. But pain was something she'd learned to endure, to work through, to use as fuel for determination rather than surrender. It took 3 hours, but finally she felt the restraints give way. The guards were vampires, which meant they had supernatural hearing and reflexes, but they also had supernatural arrogance, the assumption that a bound human posed no threat. They weren't watching her as carefully as they should have been. Lydia waited until the nearest guard turned away, then struck with the silver restraint still wrapped around her wrists. The metal caught him across the throat and he went down with a strangled cry that brought the others running. But she was already moving, using every trick Marcus had taught her, every lesson learned from 50 years of observing supernatural predators. She couldn't match their speed or strength, but she could be unpredictable, chaotic, human in ways they didn't expect. The warehouse erupted into chaos. Vampires shouted orders, searched shadows, tried to coordinate a hunt for a human who shouldn't have been able to escape her bonds. But Lydia had spent 50 years in a castle full of vampires, learning their patterns, their blind spots, their assumptions. She made it to the warehouse's loading dock before they cornered her again. "Impressive," Kozlov said, emerging from the shadows with his remaining guards. "But ultimately futile. You're surrounded, my dear. There's nowhere left to run." He was right. The loading dock opened onto a narrow alley with no other exits, and vampires blocked the only way back into the warehouse. Lydia stood at the edge of the dock, 20 feet above the alley floor, with nowhere to go but down. "Last chance," Kozlov continued. Cooperate, and I'll make this quick and painless. Refuse, and I'll take my time. Lydia looked down at the alley below, calculating distances and angles. 20 feet was a long drop for a human, but not necessarily fatal. And there were worse things than broken bones. You know what, Lord Kozlov? She said, turning back to face him with a smile. I think I'll take my chances with gravity. Before he could react, she stepped backward off the loading dock. The fall was brutal. Lydia hit the alley floor hard, pain exploding through her left leg as something snapped. But she was alive, conscious, and most importantly, free. Above her, she could hear Kozlov cursing in what sounded like Russian. The vampires would be down in seconds, but seconds might be enough. Lydia dragged herself toward the alley's mouth, her broken leg screaming with every movement. Behind her, she heard the soft thud of vampires landing on the alley floor. Enough games, Kozlov snarled. Kill her. The vampires moved forward and Lydia closed her eyes, preparing for the end. Instead, she heard the sound of steel meeting flesh, followed by screams of pain and rage. Touch her, and I'll tear out your throats. Lydia's eyes snapped open to see a familiar figure standing between her and Kozlov's vampires. Marcus, Aldrich's head of security, his sword gleaming with vampire blood as he faced down 3 opponents without a trace of fear. Marcus? She gasped. Hello, Miss Ashworth, he said without taking his eyes off the enemy vampires. His Majesty sends his regards. How did you find you? You're carrying a tracking device, courtesy of His Majesty's paranoia. He's been monitoring your location since you left the castle. He's been watching me. He's been protecting you. There's a difference. Kozlov stepped forward, his pale eyes blazing with fury. Marcus Blackwood. I should have known Aldrich would send his lapdog. Lord Kozlov, Marcus replied with icy politeness. Still trying to compensate for centuries of failure, I see. This isn't over, Blackwood. The girl knows too much, has seen too much. She's a liability to your precious king. That's not your decision to make, isn't it? Kozlov smiled, revealing fangs stained with blood. She left him, Marcus, abandoned her post, walked away from 50 years of service. What makes you think she won't betray him to the highest bidder? Because, Marcus said quietly, I know her, and more importantly, he knows her. The standoff stretched for long moments, vampires facing each other across the narrow alley, while Lydia lay bleeding on the ground between them. Finally, Kozlov stepped back. This isn't over, he repeated. The girl is a weakness, and weaknesses can always be exploited. Perhaps, but not tonight. Kozlov and his remaining vampires melted back into the shadows, leaving Marcus and Lydia alone in the alley. The head of security immediately knelt beside her, his hands gentle as he examined her injuries. Broken leg, possible concussion, various cuts and bruises. He diagnosed. You'll live, but you need medical attention. How long have you been following me? Since the day you left His Majesty's orders. Marcus's expression was carefully neutral. He wanted to ensure your safety during your sabbatical. So much for freedom. You were free, Miss Ashworth. Free to go where you pleased, do what you wanted, make your own choices. The fact that someone was watching from a distance doesn't change that, doesn't it? Lydia struggled to sit up, wincing as pain shot through her leg. He couldn't trust me to take care of myself. He couldn't bear the thought of losing you. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Lydia stared at Marcus, searching his face for any sign that he was exaggerating or misinterpreting his master's motivations. That's not what he said when I left. His Majesty says many things. That doesn't mean they're true. Marcus helped her to her feet, supporting her weight as she tested her injured leg. He's been difficult since you left, refusing to eat, working himself to exhaustion, snapping at anyone who dares suggest he might need a replacement blood taster. He's been without protection for 2 weeks. Yes, and he's been terrified every moment of it. Not of poison, of what might happen to you out here. Lydia felt something twist in her chest, an emotion she couldn't quite name. He sent you to bring me back. He sent me to keep you safe. Whether you come back or not is entirely your choice. And if I choose not to? Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then I suppose he'll spend the rest of his very long life wondering what might have been. The words hit her like a physical blow. In 50 years of service, she'd never considered that Aldrich might have feelings for her beyond professional appreciation. He'd always been so controlled, so distant. so careful to maintain the boundaries between king and servant. But looking back, she could see the signs she'd missed. The way his eyes followed her when he thought she wasn't looking, the concern in his voice when she'd been injured, the small kindnesses that went beyond what duty required. He never said anything, she whispered. Would it have mattered if he had? The question struck to the heart of everything she'd been running from. Would it have mattered? Would knowing that the vampire king harbored feelings for his human blood taster have changed anything about her desire for freedom? I don't know, she admitted. Then perhaps it's time to find out. Marcus helped her to a waiting car, his movements gentle despite his supernatural strength. As they drove through the London streets toward what she assumed was a safe house, Lydia found herself thinking about the past 2 weeks. The freedom had been intoxicating, yes. The ability to make her own choices, to explore the world beyond the castle walls, to remember what it felt like to be human among humans. But there had been loneliness too, a sense of disconnection that she'd attributed to 50 years of isolation. Now she wondered if it had been something else. Not just the absence of human contact, but the absence of him. The man who'd been the center of her world for half a century, who'd shaped her days and filled her thoughts even when she'd been trying to escape him. Marcus, she said as they pulled up to a nondescript building in Mayfair. What happens now? Now you heal, and then you decide what you want to do with the rest of your life. And if I want to go back, then you go back. And if I don't? Marcus turned to look at her, his ancient eyes kind but serious. Then you don't. But Miss Ashworth? Yes? Whatever you decide, make sure it's what you really want. Not what you think you should want. Not what others expect of you. But what will truly make you happy. How do I know what that is? I think, Marcus said gently, you already do. The safe house was elegant and comfortable, staffed by discreet humans who asked no questions and provided excellent medical care. Lydia's leg was set and splinted, her other injuries treated, and she was given a suite of rooms that rivaled anything in Aldrich's castle. But comfort couldn't quiet the turmoil in her mind. For 3 days, she lay in bed thinking about everything that had happened. The attack, the rescue, Marcus's words about Aldrich's feelings, the revelation that she'd been watched and protected even during her supposed freedom. On the 4th day, she received a visitor. Miss Ashworth. The woman who entered her room was tall and elegant, with silver hair and the kind of timeless beauty that marked her as vampire nobility. My name is Lady Catherine Dracul. I'm Aldrich's sister. Lydia struggled to sit up, her mind racing. In 50 years, she'd never met any of Aldrich's family members. She'd known he had siblings, but they lived in other parts of the world, managing their own territories and concerns. Lady Catherine, she said carefully, this is unexpected. I imagine it is. May I sit? Lydia nodded, and Catherine settled into the chair beside the bed with fluid grace. Up close, the family resemblance was unmistakable. The same aristocratic features, the same amber eyes, the same aura of barely contained power. I came to see how you were recovering, Catherine said, and to apologize. Apologize? For what? For my brother's behavior, for the way he's handled this entire situation. Catherine's expression was rueful. Aldrich has many strengths, but emotional intelligence has never been one of them. I'm not sure I understand. Don't you? My dear, you've been in love with him for years, and he's been in love with you for even longer. Yet neither of you has had the courage to admit it even to yourselves. The words hit Lydia like a slap. I'm not in love with him? Please. I've been watching this dance for decades. The way you look at him when you think no one is watching. The way he speaks your name. The careful distance you both maintain because you're terrified of what might happen if you acknowledged what's really between you. Lydia felt heat rise in her cheeks. Even if that were true, it doesn't matter. I'm human. He's the vampire king. There could never be anything between us. Why not? Because it's impossible. The politics alone are irrelevant. Aldrich is king. If he chooses to take a human consort, that's his prerogative. Catherine leaned forward, her expression intense. The only thing standing between you and happiness is your own fear. And his. He's never said anything, never indicated, because he's terrified of losing you. Do you know what it would mean for the vampire king to fall in love with a human? The vulnerability it would create? The target it would paint on your back? Catherine's voice softened. He's been protecting you the only way he knows how. by keeping his distance. Then why are you telling me this? Because 50 years is long enough, because watching two people I care about torture themselves with unspoken feelings is exhausting. And because, Catherine smiled, someone needs to give you both a push in the right direction. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting you stop running from what you want and go claim it. Stop hiding behind duty and propriety and fear, and tell my brother how you feel. And if he doesn't feel the same way, then at least you'll know. But Miss Ashworth? Catherine stood, moving toward the door. He does feel the same way. He has for years. The question is whether you're brave enough to do something about it. After Catherine left, Lydia lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her mind churning with possibilities and fears. Was it true? Had she been in love with Aldrich all these years without admitting it to herself? Had he been harboring similar feelings? Looking back, she could see the signs. The way her heart raced when he entered a room. The way she'd memorized every nuance of his expression, every shift in his mood. The way she'd felt more alive during their quiet conversations than at any other time in her long service. She'd told herself it was professional dedication, the natural result of spending 50 years in close proximity to someone. But perhaps it had been something more. And if Catherine was right about Aldrich's feelings, the thought was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. To love and be loved by the Vampire King would be dangerous, complicated, probably impossible in the long term, but it would also be the most real thing she'd ever experienced. The question was, what was she going to do about it? The answer came to her as she watched the sun set through her window, painting the London sky in shades of gold and crimson. She was going to stop running, stop hiding, stop letting fear dictate her choices. She was going to go home. The journey back to Aldrich's castle took most of the night, Marcus driving in comfortable silence while Lydia stared out at the countryside rolling past. Her leg was still tender, but the splint had been replaced with a walking cast that allowed her some mobility. More importantly, her mind was clear for the first time in weeks. She knew what she wanted now, not just freedom. She'd had that, and while it had been wonderful in many ways, it had also been empty. What she wanted was choice, the freedom to choose her own path, even if that path led back to the man she'd been trying to escape. The castle appeared in the pre-dawn darkness, its ancient towers silhouetted against the lightening sky. Lydia felt her heart skip as they passed through the gates, as familiar sights and sounds welcomed her home. Home. When had she started thinking of this place as home again? He's in his study, Marcus said as they pulled up to the main entrance. He's been there for 3 days, refusing to see anyone. Is he all right? Physically? Yes. Emotionally? Marcus shook his head. You'll see. Lydia made her way through the castle's familiar corridors, her footsteps echoing on stone floors she'd walked for 50 years. Servants bowed as she passed, their faces showing genuine pleasure at her return. Whatever else had changed, she was still welcome here. The study door was closed, but she could see light spilling from beneath it. She raised her hand to knock, then hesitated. What if Catherine was wrong? What if Aldrich saw her return as nothing more than the inevitable result of her inability to survive in the outside world? There was only one way to find out. She knocked softly. Go away, came the muffled response. Your Majesty? It's Lydia. Silence. Then the sound of a chair scraping against the floor, footsteps approaching the door. It opened to reveal Aldrich, and Lydia had to suppress a gasp at his appearance. He looked haggard, exhausted as if he hadn't slept in days. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his clothes wrinkled, his amber eyes shadowed with something that might have been despair. Lydia, he breathed, and the way he said her name, with relief and longing and desperate hope, told her everything she needed to know. Hello, Your Majesty, she said softly. May I come in? He stepped aside wordlessly, and she entered the study that had been the site of so many of their conversations over the years. It was exactly as she remembered. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a massive desk covered with papers, comfortable chairs arranged before a fireplace that cast dancing shadows on the walls. You're hurt, Aldrich said, noticing her walking cast. It's healing. Marcus got to me in time. Marcus told me what happened. Kozlov's people, if I had known they were tracking you, you would have what? Locked me up even more securely? The words came out sharper than she'd intended, and she saw him flinch. I would have protected you. You did protect me. You had me followed from the moment I left. Yes. He moved to the window, staring out at the castle grounds. I suppose that makes me a hypocrite, promising you freedom while ensuring you were never truly free. Why? Because I couldn't bear the thought of losing you. The admission seemed to cost him something. Because I've spent 50 years watching you risk your life for mine, and the idea of you facing danger without me there to protect you was unbearable. Lydia moved closer, her heart pounding. Aldrich, I know what you're going to say, that I had no right to spy on you, to interfere with your freedom. You're correct, of course, but He stopped, his shoulders sagging. I couldn't let you go. Why not? He turned to face her, and she saw a raw vulnerability in his expression. Because I love you. The words hung in the air between them, simple and devastating and completely transformative. Lydia felt tears spring to her eyes. 50 years of unspoken feelings finally given voice. You love me, she repeated. I've loved you for decades. Since the night you nearly died from that wolfsbane poison, when I held you in my arms and realized that losing you would destroy me. His voice was barely above a whisper. I've loved you through every sunrise, every sunset, every moment of every day for longer than I care to admit. Then why didn't you tell me? Because you deserved better than a monster. Because loving me would put you in danger. Because... He laughed bitterly. Because I was a coward. Lydia closed the distance between them, reaching up to cup his face in her hands. You're not a monster. I've killed thousands of people, Lydia. I've ruled through fear and violence for centuries. I'm exactly what I appear to be. You're a man who spent 50 years protecting someone he loves. A man who gave me freedom even when it meant losing me. A man who's carried the weight of an entire species on his shoulders for longer than most humans have been alive. She smiled through her tears. You're not a monster, Aldrich, you're just afraid. Afraid of what? The same thing I'm afraid of. That this is real. That it matters. That we might actually have a chance at happiness. He stared down at her, his amber eyes searching her face. Are you saying, I'm saying I love you too. I've loved you for years without admitting it to myself. I've loved you through every day of service, every night of fear, every moment of wondering what my life might have been if I'd never met you. She took a shaky breath. I left because I thought I wanted freedom, but what I really wanted was choice. The choice to stay because I wanted to, not because I had to. And now? Now I'm choosing you. Choosing this. Choosing us, if you'll have me. For a moment, he simply stared at her. Then, with a sound that might have been a sob or a laugh, he pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she might disappear if he let go. I thought I'd lost you, he whispered against her hair. When Marcus told me about the attack, when I realized how close I'd come to losing you forever. You didn't lose me. I'm here. I'm staying. Are you certain? Because I can't. I won't go through this again. If you stay, it has to be forever. Lydia pulled back to look at him, seeing the fear and hope warring in his expression. Forever is a long time. For me, it's not long enough. She smiled, feeling lighter than she had in years. Then it's a good thing I'm not entirely human anymore, isn't it? 50 years of vampire blood has to count for something. Lydia, I'm staying, Aldrich. Not as your blood taster, not as your servant, but as your partner, your equal, your choice, freely made. And if the vampire nobles object to their king taking a human consort, then they can object. You're the king. I think you can handle a little political pressure. He laughed, the sound rich and warm and completely unguarded. I love you. I love you too. When he kissed her, it was with 50 years of suppressed longing, 50 years of careful distance finally bridged. It was desperate and tender and perfect, the kiss of two people who'd finally found their way home to each other. When they finally broke apart, Lydia rested her forehead against his, breathing in his familiar scent of sandalwood and winter air. So, she said, what happens now? Now? Now we figure out how to rule a kingdom together, how to balance duty and desire, responsibility and love. He smiled, his amber eyes bright with possibility. Now we write a new story. I like the sound of that. Good, because I have a feeling it's going to be quite an adventure. As the sun rose over the castle walls, painting the study in shades of gold and promise, Lydia Ashworth, soon to be Lydia Dracul, settled into her new role, not as a servant or a prisoner, but as a partner to the most powerful vampire in existence. It wouldn't be easy. There would be political challenges, supernatural threats, and the constant navigation of a relationship between two very different species. But for the first time in 50 years, she was exactly where she chose to be. 3 months later, the castle was alive with preparations for an event that hadn't occurred in vampire society for over a millennium: the coronation of a human queen. Lydia stood before the mirror in what had once been her simple servants' quarters, but was now a suite of rooms befitting her new status. The gown she wore was a masterpiece of midnight blue silk and silver embroidery, designed to complement rather than compete with Aldrich's formal regalia. "You look beautiful," Catherine said from behind her, adjusting the delicate silver circlet that would mark Lydia's new rank. "Though I have to say you also look terrified." "I am terrified," Lydia admitted. 3 months ago, I was a blood taster. Tonight I become queen of the vampires. The learning curve has been steep. You're handling it better than most would. The nobles respect you, the servants adore you, and my brother is happier than I've seen him in centuries. The nobles tolerate me because Aldrich made it clear that objecting would be hazardous to their health. Perhaps initially, but you've proven yourself since then. The way you handled the territorial dispute with the Scottish clans, your suggestions for modernizing our financial systems, your diplomatic work with the werewolf packs. You're not just Aldrich's consort, Lydia. You're his partner in every sense of the word. It was true. The past 3 months had been a whirlwind of political education, social navigation, and learning to wield power she'd never imagined possessing. But with Aldrich's support and her own determination, she'd found her footing in the complex world of vampire politics. "Are you ready?" Catherine asked. Lydia took a deep breath, looking at her reflection one last time. The woman in the mirror bore little resemblance to the frightened 17-year-old who'd first entered this castle 50 years ago. This woman had confidence, purpose, and most importantly, choice. "I'm ready." The coronation ceremony took place in the castle's great hall, attended by vampire nobles from across Europe and beyond. As Lydia walked down the aisle toward the ancient throne where Aldrich waited, she could feel the weight of centuries of tradition pressing down on her. But when she met Aldrich's eyes, all of that faded away. There was only love there, and pride, and the promise of a future they would build together. The ceremony itself was brief but profound. Ancient words in languages that predated human civilization. Vows that bound her not just to Aldrich but to the vampire nation itself. When the crown was placed on her head, a delicate creation of silver and moonstone that had been crafted specifically for her, she felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. "My queen," Aldrich said, taking her hand and raising it to his lips. "My king," she replied, and the assembled nobles erupted in applause. Later, as the celebration continued in the halls below, Lydia and Aldrich stood on the balcony of their private chambers, looking out over the moonlit countryside. "Any regrets?" he asked, echoing her question from months before. "None," she said firmly, "though I reserve the right to panic occasionally about the enormity of what we're attempting. We'll figure it out as we go. We have time. Centuries of it, if the court physicians are correct about what 50 years of vampire blood has done to my lifespan." "Centuries," Aldrich agreed, pulling her closer. "Think of all the adventures we'll have, all the changes we'll see, all the ways we can make the world better. Starting with vampire-human relations, starting with us. Everything else will follow." As if summoned by their conversation, Marcus appeared in the doorway, his expression apologetic but urgent. "Your Majesties, forgive the interruption, but we've received word from the American Vampire Council. They're requesting a formal audience to discuss diplomatic relations." Lydia and Aldrich exchanged glances. The American vampires had been notably absent from the coronation, their silence speaking volumes about their opinion of a human queen. "When?" Aldrich asked. "They're requesting a meeting within the month, in neutral territory." "Interesting timing," Lydia observed. "Right after they've had time to assess the political implications of tonight's ceremony." "Indeed. How would you like to respond?" Aldrich looked at Lydia, and she saw the question in his eyes. This would be their first major test as co-rulers, their first opportunity to present a united front to the wider vampire world. "We accept," Lydia said firmly, "but on our terms. They want to meet with the king and queen of the European vampires. They can come here, to our territory, under our protection." "You're sure?" Aldrich asked quietly. I'm sure. We have nothing to hide and nothing to apologize for. If they want to challenge our authority, let them do it where everyone can see the outcome. Aldrich's smile was fierce and proud. As you wish, my queen. As Marcus withdrew to draft their response, Lydia felt a familiar thrill of anticipation. The future stretched ahead of them, full of challenges and possibilities and the promise of change. She'd spent 50 years as a prisoner in a gilded cage, dreaming of freedom. Now she had something better: purpose, partnership, and the power to shape the world according to her own vision. Ready for the next adventure? Aldrich asked. Lydia smiled, her hand finding his as they stood together on the threshold of tomorrow. With you, I'm ready for anything. The American delegation arrived exactly 1 month later, their black cars winding up the mountain road to the castle like a funeral procession. Lydia watched from the tower window as they approached, noting the careful spacing of the vehicles, the way the occupants remained hidden behind tinted glass. Nervous? Aldrich asked, joining her at the window. Curious, she corrected. I've never met American vampires before. Are they very different from Europeans? Younger, generally. Less bound by tradition, more willing to embrace change, but also more aggressive, more territorial. They built their power through violence rather than politics. Sounds like they might actually respect directness over diplomacy. Perhaps. We'll find out soon enough. The delegation was led by someone called Director Harrison, a vampire who appeared to be in his 40s but carried himself with the authority of centuries. He was accompanied by a small entourage of advisors and guards, all of them radiating the kind of controlled menace that marked professional killers. The formal reception took place in the throne room, with Lydia and Aldrich seated on matching thrones that had been specially commissioned for the occasion. The symbolism was deliberate. 2 rulers, equal in authority, presenting a united front. Director Harrison, Aldrich said as the American delegation was announced. Welcome to our castle. Your Majesty, Harrison replied with a bow that was precisely correct, but somehow managed to convey skepticism. Thank you for receiving us. His gaze moved to Lydia, and she felt the weight of his assessment. Unlike the European nobles who had learned to hide their opinions behind centuries of courtly manners, Harrison's expression was openly evaluative. Your Majesty, he said to her, the title sounding strange in his American accent. Director Harrison, Lydia replied smoothly. I trust your journey was comfortable? Quite, though I admit I'm curious about the unusual circumstances of this meeting. Unusual how? Well, it's not every day one receives an invitation from a human queen. The words were carefully chosen, designed to probe for weakness or uncertainty. Lydia had been expecting something like this. The Americans would want to test her, to see if she was truly Aldrich's equal or merely a decorative consort. No, she agreed pleasantly. I imagine it's not. Just as I imagine it's not every day you meet vampires who've successfully modernized their society without sacrificing their core values. Harrison's eyebrows rose slightly. Modernized? Our recent reforms to territorial law, our new accords with the werewolf packs, our updated financial systems that have increased our wealth by 30% in the past quarter. Lydia's voice was conversational, but her meaning was clear. Perhaps you haven't heard about our recent improvements. I've heard rumors. Then you know we're not simply maintaining the status quo. We're building something new, something better. The question is whether the American Council is interested in being part of that future. The throne room fell silent, the tension thick enough to cut. Harrison studied Lydia for a long moment, and she could see him reassessing his initial assumptions. What exactly are you proposing? He asked finally. An alliance, Aldrich said, speaking for the first time since the initial greetings. Formal diplomatic relations between our territories, with mutual defense agreements and shared intelligence networks. And in return? In return, you gain access to our resources, our knowledge, our innovations. You become part of a larger community rather than an isolated power struggling to maintain relevance in a changing world. Harrison's expression sharpened. You think we're struggling? I think you're here, Lydia said simply, which suggests you recognize the value of what we're offering. The negotiations continued for 3 days, with both sides carefully probing for advantage while maintaining the facade of diplomatic courtesy. Lydia found herself enjoying the process more than she'd expected. The intellectual challenge of matching wits with ancient predators, the delicate dance of power and persuasion. On the final evening, As the formal agreements were being drafted, Harrison requested a private audience with her. "You're not what I expected," he said as they walked through the castle's moonlit gardens. "What did you expect? A figurehead. A pretty human who'd been elevated beyond her capabilities for political reasons." He paused beside a fountain, his expression thoughtful. "Instead, I find someone who understands power, who wields it effectively, who's genuinely changed the dynamics of European vampire society. Did that surprise you?" "It impressed me. There are vampires 3 times your age who couldn't have handled these negotiations as skillfully as you have." "Thank you, I think." Harrison smiled, the expression transforming his stern features. It was a compliment and a warning. A warning? Not all of my colleagues will be as open-minded as I am. There are those in the American Council who see your elevation as an insult to vampire superiority, a dangerous precedent that threatens the natural order. And what do you see it as? Evolution, adaptation, the kind of change that ensures survival rather than extinction. He turned to face her fully. "But change is always dangerous, Your Majesty, especially for those who embody it." "Are you threatening me, Director?" "I'm warning you. There are forces in our world that don't want to see vampires and humans working together as equals. Your very existence challenges beliefs that have persisted for millennia. Then perhaps it's time those beliefs were challenged." "Perhaps. But be careful, Your Majesty. Revolution always comes with a price." The American delegation departed the next morning, leaving behind signed agreements that would reshape supernatural politics for decades to come. But Harrison's warning lingered in Lydia's mind, a reminder that their success had made them targets. "Worried?" Aldrich asked as they watched the cars disappear down the mountain road. "Cautious," Lydia corrected. Harrison was right about one thing. We're challenging the established order. That makes us dangerous to those who benefit from the status quo. Let them come. We've faced worse. Have we? This isn't about territorial disputes or clan rivalries. This is about the fundamental nature of vampire society, about whether humans and vampires can truly be equals. And what do you think? Can we? Lydia considered the question, thinking about everything they'd accomplished in the past few months, the reforms they'd implemented, the alliances they'd forged, the way they'd proven that cooperation was stronger than domination. "Yes," she said finally, "but it won't be easy. The best things never are." As they walked back toward the castle, Lydia felt the weight of the future settling on her shoulders. There would be more challenges ahead, more enemies to face, more battles to fight. But she was no longer the frightened girl who'd begged for freedom in this very courtyard. She was a queen, a partner, a force for change in a world that desperately needed it. And she was exactly where she chose to be. What an absolutely breathtaking journey from captive blood taster to vampire queen. I'm still reeling from the emotional complexity of Lydia and Aldrich's relationship, 50 years of unspoken love, the courage it took for her to demand freedom, and his willingness to let her go even though it terrified him. The way their love story unfolded through political intrigue, genuine partnership, and mutual respect rather than just passion was absolutely masterful. And can we talk about how Lydia evolved from someone seeking escape to someone choosing to stay and transform an entire society? That character development gave me chills. What did you think of the twist that Aldrich had been protecting her even during her freedom? Was it romantic devotion or controlling behavior? Or both? If you loved this epic tale of love, power, and the courage to redefine what's possible, please hit that subscribe button. I have so many more incredible stories waiting for you. Let me know in the comments. Do you think Lydia made the right choice in returning to Aldrich, or should she have stayed free in the human world? And here's something that's been haunting me. Can true love exist when there's such an imbalance of power, or did their partnership as equals change everything? Next week, I'm bringing you another heart-stopping supernatural romance. Fallen angel loses her wings saving a demon. He spends 100 years trying to earn them back. Trust me, you won't want to miss that emotional masterpiece.